housewife tired of her routine and forgotten by her own family decided to take a trip that would change everything, leaving for Greece in search of herself. What she discovered about love, freedom, and courage transformed not only her life, but also saved a marriage that seemed lost forever. A story of self-discovery, renewal, and the courage to be reborn. Get ready, because this journey of transformation will move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment on what you thought of this story. The kitchen clock struck 6:15 as Selena Castaneda began another day identical to the last 15 years. Her bare feet touched the cool tile floor as she adjusted the faded blue robe Carlos had given her for their first wedding anniversary. Now, at 44, that soft fabric was one of the few things that still offered her some comfort. "Good morning, walls," he murmured to the empty kitchen, a routine he'd developed since Miguel and Sofia left for university. Another glorious day awaits us, don't you think? The yellow walls she had once painted with such enthusiasm remained silent. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, creating familiar patterns on the floor she knew by heart. Selena sighed and walked to the coffee maker, her movements automatic and precise, like a ballerina rehearsing the same choreography for decades. Carlos had already left for work, his absence marked only by the dirty cup in the sink and the lingering scent of his cheap aftershave. 15 years ago, that smell had made her sigh with passion. Today, it merely reminded her of yet another obligation fulfilled. The coffee served promptly at 5:45, the scrambled eggs exactly how he liked them, the newspaper folded beside his plate. As the coffee pot bubbled, Selena studied her reflection in the window. Her once long silky brown hair was now tied back in a practical bun she'd done without even looking in the mirror. Her green eyes, which Miguel always claimed he inherited from her, seemed duller by the day. "When was the last time you wore lipstick? When was the last time someone complimented you?" "Do you remember when I wore red dresses?" she asked her reflection. "The one I wore to dance flamenco at university?" Carlos said I looked like fire in motion. The reflection didn't respond, but Selena could see a hint of a nostalgic smile cross her face. She had been different once, passionate, bold, full of dreams that seemed too immense to be contained within a house in Seville. The phone rang, interrupting his reverie. It was his mother, as always at 6:30 sharp. "Selena, my daughter, have you prepared lunch for Carlos yet?" "It's still 6:30 in the morning, Mommy." A good wife always comes forward. "And the children? How are Miguel and Sofia?" "They're doing well, Mom. Miguel finishes engineering next year, and Sofia is loving her medical degree." "How proud. And you, my daughter? How are you feeling with the empty house?" Selena hesitated. How could she explain to her mother that the empty house made her feel like a ghost wandering the halls? How could she tell her that some mornings she woke up not knowing why she should get out of bed? "I'm fine, Mom. I have more time to take care of Carlos now." "That's right, my dear. Marriage is a blessing. Your father and I will be married for 50 years next month. And look how happy we are." After hanging up the phone, Selena remained motionless for a few moments. 50 years. The idea simultaneously terrified and fascinated her. Was this her fate? Another 30 years of punctual coffees, silent lunches, and nights watching television next to a man who seemed to have forgotten she was more than an efficient domestic worker? She walked into the living room where family photographs smiled down at her from the wooden shelves. She stopped before a photo from her wedding, her, radiant in a lace dress, and Carlos, young and in love, looking at her as if she were the only woman in the world. When had he last looked at her like that? "Where have you gone, Selena?" he whispered to the photo. The woman who dreamed of traveling the world, who wanted to write a book, who believed life would be an endless adventure. The sound of the doorbell brought her back to reality. It was the mailman delivering a stack of bills and advertisements. Among them, a letter from Sofia made her smile genuinely for the first time that morning. "Dear Mom," her daughter's familiar handwriting read, "Barcelona is amazing. Yesterday I went to the Picasso Museum with some friends from college. I remembered you telling me about your passion for art when you were young. Why haven't you ever taken me to a museum? It would be wonderful if one day we could travel together and see all the places you've always dreamed of visiting. I love you so much. Sofia." Sofia's words echoed in her mind all morning. As she tidied the house, folded clothes, and prepared lunch, Selena couldn't stop thinking about the young woman she had once been. She truly had dreamed of seeing the world, of seeing the works of art she read so much about, of feeling the sun of other countries on her face. Around noon, when the silence in the house became almost deafening, she found herself talking to the walls again. "Do you think there's still time?" he asked the ceiling of the room. 44 years? Is it still possible to start over? The answer came in the form of a sudden memory. Lucia Morales, her best friend from college, with whom she had lost touch more than 10 years ago. Lucia, who always said life began at 40, who had divorced at 50 and left to travel the world. Lucia, who had sent a postcard from Santorini 2 years earlier with just one sentence: "Life is too short to be lived halfway." At that moment, with Sophia's letter still in her hands and the afternoon sun painting the yellow walls gold, Selena Castañeda made a decision that would change everything. She would find Lucia. The search for Lucia began as an archaeological investigation through old phone books and dusty boxes stored in the attic. Selena discovered she had accumulated more memories than she had imagined. Photographs from college, love letters Carlos had written to her during their courtship, and a diary she had kept religiously from the ages of 18 to 25. Sitting on the attic floor, amid cobwebs and rays of sunlight filtering through the small window, she opened her diary to a random page. Her own young, impetuous handwriting leaped from the paper. "Today, Lucia and I made plans to travel around Europe after graduation. She says we should start with Greece, the cradle of civilization, as she likes to say. I dream of watching the sunset in Santorini, of touching the ancient stones of the Parthenon. Carlos thinks it's silly, says we should save money for the wedding. But why can't I have both? Why do I have to choose between love and adventure?" Her hands trembled slightly as she read those words. The young woman who had written those lines seemed like a familiar stranger, someone she recognized, but had lost along the way between dreams and reality. He continued flipping through the pages. "Lucia said something to me today that I can't forget. Selena, you shine when you talk about your dreams. Don't let anyone dim that light. Sometimes I'm afraid Carlos doesn't understand that part of me. He loves me, I'm sure of that. But does he love the dreamer, or just the woman I can become for him?" The sound of the garage door slamming brought her abruptly back to the present. Carlos had arrived home from work early. Quickly, she put away her diary and went downstairs, smoothing her hair and checking her clothes for dirt. "Hello, dear," Carlos said, placing a mechanical kiss on her forehead. "It smells good. What's for lunch? Paella? Just the way you like it." "Perfect. I'll just wash my hands." As Carlos walked up the stairs, Selena noticed how he had changed over the years. He was still an attractive man at 46, but there was a stiffness in his movements, a predictability she didn't remember when they were younger. His gray hair was always perfectly combed, his clothes impeccable, his routine inflexible. During lunch, she tried to start a conversation about old times. "Carlos, do you remember Lucia Morales? From university?" He stopped chewing for a moment, thinking. The blonde? The one who always had crazy ideas? She wasn't blonde, and her ideas weren't crazy. She was adventurous. "Ah, yes. I vaguely remember. Why do you ask?" "I thought I'd try to find her. It's been so long since we've spoken." Carlos shrugged. "If you think it's worth it, just don't forget we have dinner with my parents on Saturday. My mom's waiting for that almond pie you make." And just like that, the conversation died before it could even begin. Selena nodded and continued eating, but her mind was elsewhere, wondering what it would be like to talk to someone who still remembered the woman she had been. That afternoon, she summoned her courage and called her old university. After being transferred 3 times, she finally managed to speak to someone who knew Lucia. "Lucia Morales? Of course I remember her," said the animated voice of Professor Martinez, who had been their advisor. "She was here a few months ago giving a talk about her travel experiences. An extraordinary woman. She's lived a fascinating life since retiring. Do you have her contact information? I can give her your number and ask her to get in touch. She'll be delighted to hear from you, I'm sure." As she waited for the call, Selena found herself remembering more moments with Lucia. Her friend had always been the bravest of the group, the one who suggested the most daring adventures, the one who questioned why women should limit their dreams. Lucia had been the only one to ask on the day of Selena's engagement, if she was sure this was what she wanted. "Don't get me wrong," Lucia had said at the time. "Carlos is a good man. But you have so much to offer the world, Selena. So much passion for discovering new things. Are you sure you want to settle down so young?" Selena had been angry at the time, defending her choice with the vehemence of someone trying to convince herself. Now, 20 years later, Lucia's words echoed in her mind with painful clarity. The phone rang at 7 o'clock in the evening when she was preparing dinner. "Selena Castañeda, I can't believe it." Lucia's familiar, warm voice boomed over the phone. "Professor Martinez told me you were looking for me. What a joy to hear your voice." "Lucia?" Selena felt unexpected tears well up in her eyes. "How are you? Where are you?" "I'm fine, very fine. I just got back from a season in Tuscany. Now I'm in Madrid for a few weeks before leaving for Greece. And you, dear? How are Carlos and the kids?" "Everyone's fine. Miguel and Sofia are at university now. The house is quiet." There was a pause, and Lucia, with the sensitivity that had always characterized her, noticed something in her friend's voice. "Selena, are you okay? Really okay?" And that's when the floodgates opened. Right there, standing in the kitchen as the dinner sauce simmered on the stove, Selena found herself telling Lucia about the feeling of living someone else's life, about the conversations with the walls, about the feeling that the days repeated themselves without meaning. "Oh, my dear friend," Lucia said softly, "I recognize that feeling. I've been there too. How did you get out of that?" "One day at a time, and with the help of friends who reminded me of who I was before I became just a wife and mother." "Selena, would you like to meet up? I'm planning on going to Greece next week. Santorini, specifically." Santorini. The name rang in Selena's mind like a distant bell, echoing ancient and forgotten dreams. I can't. Carlos expects me to." "What does Carlos expect, or what do you think he expects?" The question hung in the air, fraught with possibilities Selena dared not contemplate. At that moment, Carlos entered the kitchen and she quickly said goodbye to Lucia, promising to call back the next day. But all night, as Carlos slept beside her, Selena lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the echo of Lucia's question. And for the first time in a long time, she began to question whether the life she was living was truly hers. The following days became a delicate dance between family routine and secret phone calls with Lucia. Selena found herself eagerly awaiting the moments when Carlos left the house so she could call her friend, like a teenager hiding a relationship from her parents. Lucia, for her part, seemed to have a supernatural intuition for calling at the most inopportune moments. On Tuesday, the phone rang just as Selena was serving dinner to Carlos and his parents, who had arrived earlier than expected. "Who is it?" asked Carlos, noticing his wife's hesitation. "It must be some telemarketer," Selena lied, letting the phone ring until it stopped. "You seem nervous lately, dear," observed her mother-in-law, Dona Carmen, with that tone of false concern she always used. "I hope you're not developing neuroses now that you're home alone." "Mamá, por favor," Carlos scolded softly, but Selena noticed that he didn't defend his sanity very vehemently. "It's just that women our age sometimes do impulsive things," Dona Carmen continued, elegantly cutting her meat. "My friend Pilar, at 42, suddenly decided she wanted to learn to tango. She ended up hurting herself and spending a fortune on useless lessons." "There's nothing wrong with wanting to learn new things," Selena said, surprised at her own courage in contradicting her mother-in-law. "Of course not, dear. But there's an age for everything, isn't there? A married woman, a mother, has responsibilities. She can't go around doing crazy things like a 20-year-old girl." Selena felt her face heat up, but before she could respond, her father-in-law changed the subject to soccer, and the moment passed. However, Dona Carmen's words kept ringing in her head all night. The next morning, as soon as Carlos left the house, Selena returned Lucia's call. "Sorry I didn't answer yesterday. Carlos was here with his parents." "No need to apologize, dear, but tell me, how was your conversation with Carlos about the trip?" "I haven't talked to him yet." "Selena, I know, it's complicated." "What's complicated? Asking your husband to go on a trip with a friend?" When put like that, it really did seem simple. But Selena knew the reality was much more complex. Carlos didn't explicitly forbid anything. He was too subtle for that. Instead, he used body language, charged silences, and seemingly innocent remarks that made his disapproval clear. "He'll say it's irresponsible to leave the house alone," Selena finally said. "That a married woman shouldn't travel without her husband, that we don't have money for unnecessary expenses. And you agree with that?" Selena hesitated. "I don't know what I agree with anymore. Sometimes I feel like I've lived by other people's opinions for so long that I've forgotten what my own opinion is." "Then this trip might be just what you need to rediscover that." After the phone call, Selena found herself wandering around the house with growing unease. She stopped in front of the hall mirror and really looked at herself for the first time in months. When was the last time she'd bought a new outfit? When had she gone to the hairdresser? When had she worn makeup for anything other than special occasions? The woman in the mirror seemed afraid of her own reflection. Impulsively, she decided to leave. She grabbed her car keys, something she rarely did during the week, and drove to the center of Seville. She walked the streets she'd known since her youth, observing other women her age. Some seemed radiant, self-assured, with purpose in their steps. Others, like her, seemed like shadows of their former selves walking aimlessly. She stopped in front of a bookstore and, on impulse, went in. The travel section drew her like a magnet. She leafed through guidebooks about Greece, absorbing photographs of turquoise waters, white architecture, and golden sunsets. Her heart raced when she saw a photo of Santorini, exactly as she had imagined all these years. "Interested in Greece?" asked the salesman, a young man with curious eyes. I'm just looking. It's an incredible destination. I was there last year. Santorini is magical. You feel like time stands still." Time stood still. The expression echoed in her mind. Wasn't that exactly how she'd felt for years? As if time had stopped, but in a suffocating, non-magical way. She bought the guidebook to Greece, a small rebellion that made her feel simultaneously guilty and excited. At home, she hid the book in the back of her bedroom closet like a teenager hiding a diary. But that night, when Carlos was asleep, she got up quietly and took the book to the kitchen, where she read by the light of the small lamp on the table. The pages about Santorini transported her to another world. She could almost feel the Aegean breeze, the warmth of the Mediterranean sun on her skin, the taste of fresh olives and feta cheese. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine excitement. When Carlos came down that morning, he found her still in the kitchen, but this time she wasn't talking to the walls. She was smiling to herself. "You're up early," he observed, noticing that the coffee wasn't ready yet. "I couldn't sleep well," she said, quickly closing the book that was still on the table. Carlos frowned when he saw the cover. "Greece? Why do you have a book about Greece?" The moment of truth had arrived. Selena took a deep breath and looked into the eyes of the man she had shared her life with for 2 decades. "Carlos, we need to talk." The conversation Selena had so dreaded happened exactly as she had predicted, but even more frustrating than she had imagined. Carlos didn't yell or explicitly forbid it. Instead, he used his most effective weapon: cold, ruthless logic. "I understand you're feeling a little lost with the empty house," he said, sitting at the kitchen table with the straight posture he used in work meetings. "It's natural, but a trip to Greece? Selena, be realistic. Why can't I be realistic and still want to live a little? It's not a matter of not wanting you to live, it's a matter of responsibility. We have a house to maintain, bills to pay. I work hard every day so we can have a comfortable life." Selena felt a familiar wave of guilt spread through her chest. Carlos really did work hard. He was a good provider, never raised his voice to her, never drank excessively or had extramarital affairs. In the eyes of the world, she had an exemplary marriage. "I'm not belittling your work, Carlos, but we have some savings. A week in Greece wouldn't bankrupt us. 1 week turns into 2, 2 turns into a month. And then what? Do you want to do this every year? Do you want to abandon your responsibilities whenever you feel bored?" The word bored sounded like an insult, as if her feelings were merely the whims of a spoiled woman. "It's not boredom, Carlos. It's like I've forgotten who I am. You are my wife. You are the mother of our children. You are a responsible and dedicated woman. Isn't that enough?" The question hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Because deep down, Selena knew the answer was no. It wasn't enough. But admitting that would be admitting that all the sacrifices of the last 20 years had been in vain. Of course it's enough, he muttered, hating himself for the lie. Carlos visibly relaxed, thinking he'd won the argument. Great. So how about we plan something more sensible? We can go to Madrid for a weekend, visit some museums, dine at nice restaurants. It'll be fun. Madrid, 2 hours from home, for a weekend, with Carlos planning every minute of the itinerary. Selena nodded and forced a smile, but something inside her had died a little more. In the days that followed, she found herself observing Carlos with new eyes. She noticed how he subtly controlled every aspect of their lives, unilaterally deciding what TV show they would watch, which restaurant they would go to, which friends they would visit. He did this so skillfully that she had never noticed the pattern. Her opinions were sought only on matters he deemed appropriate for her: decor, menus, the children's clothes. When was the last time he had asked her what she really wanted? The answer came unexpectedly during a call from Miguel. His son, now 22 and studying engineering in Barcelona, called every week to talk. "How's Daddy?" Miguel asked, as he always did. "Well, working hard. And you, Mom? How are you feeling with the empty house?" Her son's simple, genuine question almost brought her to tears. When was the last time someone had asked her how she felt? "Sometimes I feel a little lost," she admitted. "Why don't you travel a little? You always talked about wanting to see other places when we were little. I remember you showing us pictures of Greece in books and saying you wanted to go there someday." He remembered. Her 22-year-old son remembered the dreams she had buried so long ago that even she herself could no longer remember them clearly. "Your father doesn't think it's a good idea. Daddy was always very cautious. But Mommy, you're 44, not 84. Why can't you go on a trip?" The conversation with Miguel planted a seed of rebellion in her heart. If her own son encouraged her independence, why did she feel so guilty about wanting it? That night, while Carlos watched the news, she got up quietly and went to the phone in the kitchen. "Lucia? It's me. Selena, it's so good to hear your voice. Have you talked to Carlos yet?" "I talked. He wasn't very enthusiastic. And you're going to let that stop you?" The simple question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Why would she let him? When had she become a person who needed permission to live her own life? "When are you leaving for Greece?" he asked impulsively. "Next Monday. Why, are you thinking of coming?" Maybe. Let me think about it a little more." "Selena, can I tell you something? When I got divorced 5 years ago, everyone said it was crazy, that I was too old to start over, that I should just settle for what I had. But you know what I discovered? That at 50 I finally started really living. I'm not saying you should get divorced. I'm saying you should stop divorcing yourself." After hanging up the phone, Selena stood in the dark kitchen for several minutes. Divorce herself. The phrase echoed in her mind with painful precision. She had spent so much time trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter-in-law that she had completely forgotten how to be Selena. And for the first time in 20 years, she decided maybe it was time to remember. The following week passed in a silent tension that permeated every corner of the house. Carlos, with the keen intuition of someone who's lived with someone for 2 decades, sensed that something had changed in Selena, but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. "You seem different," he said Thursday morning, watching her over the top of his newspaper. "More restless." Selena, who was preparing scrambled eggs with more energy than usual, paused for a moment. She truly felt different. Since her conversation with Lucia, it was as if something inside her had awakened, a version of herself that had lain dormant for so long. "Maybe it's age," he replied evasively. "Age? You're 44, not 64. The remark, made without malice, struck her unexpectedly. 44 years old. Carlos was right. She was still relatively young. Why did she feel as if life had already passed her by? That day after Carlos left for work, she made a surprising decision. She went to the hairdresser, not just to get a trim like she did every 3 months, but for a real change. "I want something different," she said to Carmen, the hairdresser who had been working with her for years. "Something that makes me feel alive." Carmen, a 50-year-old woman with colorful highlights and a youthful demeanor, smiled enthusiastically. Finally! I've been waiting for years for you to give me a chance to do something interesting with that beautiful hair of yours. 2 hours later, Selena was looking in the mirror at a woman she recognized but hadn't seen in a long time. Her brown hair now had golden highlights that caught the light, and the more modern cut framed her face in a way that highlighted her green eyes. "Wow, Selena," Carmen exclaimed. "You look radiant. 10 years younger, at least." Selena touched her hair nervously. "Do you think it's too bold?" "Bold? Honey, this is just the beginning. When was the last time you bought a new outfit? I'm not talking about practical clothes for the house, but something that makes you feel beautiful." The question struck Selena like a revelation. When had the last time been? Probably over 2 years ago, and even then it had been something conservative and Carlos approved. "Come on," Carmen said, taking off her apron. "My cousin has a boutique 2 blocks away. Let's take a look. I can't, Carlos is waiting for lunch at home." Carlos can wait a day, or better yet, he can prepare his own lunch. The idea of Carlos preparing his own meal was so absurd that Selena almost laughed. But there was something liberating in the suggestion, the knowledge that her needs might occasionally come before his. Carmen's cousin Rosa's boutique was small, but full of colorful, modern pieces. Selena was drawn to a turquoise dress she would never normally wear. "Try it," Rosa encouraged. "This color will look beautiful with your eyes." In the fitting room, Selena hesitated. The dress was tighter than anything she'd worn in years, highlighting curves she'd forgotten she had. It wasn't immodest, but it was definitely more feminine and confident than her usual outfit. "How did it go?" Carmen asked outside. Selena hesitantly opened the door. The 2 women's silence made her nervous until Rosa finally spoke. "My God, what a transformation. You look like a different person." "A better version of herself," Carmen added. Looking at herself in the store's full-length mirror, Selena had to agree. The woman in the reflection looked confident, attractive, alive. It was her, but a version that had been hidden for a long time. She bought the dress impulsively, along with matching heeled sandals. These were purchases he would normally discuss with Carlos first, but this time he felt he didn't need anyone's approval. When she got home, it was almost 2 in the afternoon. Carlos was waiting for her in the living room with a worried expression that quickly turned to shock when he saw her. "Selena, what did you do to your hair?" The tone wasn't exactly approving. Selena felt the familiar wave of insecurity begin to build, but this time she fought it. "You didn't like it? It's very different. And where were you?" "I arrived for lunch and the house was empty. I went to the hairdresser, and then I did some shopping." "What are you buying?" The question sounded more like an interrogation than genuine interest. Selena held up the bags and Carlos examined the dress with a hard-to-read expression. "It's quite flashy. What occasion do you need a dress like that for?" "Maybe for no specific occasion. Maybe just because I liked him." Carlos seemed genuinely confused by the answer. In their dynamic, clothes were bought out of necessity or for specific events, never simply for pleasure. How much did it cost? The final question confirmed what Selena already knew. Carlos saw his purchases as an unnecessary expense, not an investment in his self-esteem. It wasn't expensive, she half lied. In truth, she had spent more than she normally would, but less than the dress was worth. Dinner that night was tense. Carlos made subtle comments about sudden changes and impulsive behavior, while Selena struggled between family guilt and a new determination to be unapologetic about trying to feel good about herself. The situation worsened when Dona Carmen called during dessert. "Carlos, honey, I need to talk to you about Selena." The conversation was being conducted on speakerphone, so Selena could hear every venomous word. "I ran into Maria Jose today at the market and she said she saw Selena in a boutique, buying fancy clothes and with her hair all different. You need to be careful, mijo. Women that age sometimes do strange things." "Mom, please." "No, listen. Remember the Rodriguez's neighbor? At 45, she decided she wanted to find herself and ended up leaving her husband for a dance instructor 20 years younger. These things start that way, with changes in appearance." Selena felt her blood boil. Getting up from the table and leaving the room was an act of self-preservation. "Selena, where are you going?" Carlos called. "To wash the dishes," she replied without turning around. In the kitchen, as she scrubbed the dishes with more force than necessary, She heard Carlos politely ending his conversation with his mother. Minutes later, he appeared at the door. "Selena, you know my mom sometimes talks too much. Your mother compared me to a woman who abandoned her family. Why? Because I changed my hair? You have to admit you've been acting different lately." "Different how? Because I want to feel beautiful? Because I buy clothes that I like? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life invisible?" "Invisible? Selena, you're not invisible. You're..." "What, Carlos? What am I?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Selena found her answer. He couldn't define her beyond her roles: wife, mother, homemaker. She had become a function, not a person. "You're being dramatic," he said finally. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm being honest for the first time in years." That night, lying in bed next to her peacefully sleeping husband, Selena made a decision. She silently picked up her phone and texted Lucia. "When you said Monday, what time?" The answer came minutes later. "Flight at 2 p.m. from Madrid. Are you really coming?" Selena looked at Carlos, who was snoring softly. She looked at the room they'd shared for 20 years with its neutral beige walls and practical furniture. She looked at her life, stretched out before her like a straight, predictable road. "Yes," he typed. "I'm coming." And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was making a decision that was completely his own. The weekend leading up to Monday was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and secret preparations. Selena found herself living a double life. During the day, she maintained the appearance of normality, but in her spare moments, she plotted her escape to freedom. On Saturday morning, while Carlos mowed the lawn with his usual precision, she discreetly called the bank and checked her personal savings. The money she had saved over years of small household savings would be enough for the trip. Technically, she didn't need Carlos's approval to spend it, but her lifetime of conditioning made her feel like she was committing a crime. Flights to Athens, she muttered to herself as she secretly surfed the internet. Hotel in Santorini. Travel insurance. Every click of the mouse was an act of rebellion. Every confirmed reservation a small victory against the invisible chains that bound her. The situation became more tense when Sophia called, as she did every Sunday. "Mommy, you look different," her daughter exclaimed over the video call. "I love your hair." "Thank you, dear. How are your studies going?" "Well, but tell me about yourself. Dad said you've been acting a little strange lately." Selena felt a pang of pain when she learned that Carlos had commented to Sophia about her behavior. "I'm just rediscovering some things about myself." "That's great. You've always been so dedicated to all of us that sometimes I worried if you were taking care of yourself too." Sophia's words were like a balm to his wounded heart. His own daughter understood something Carlos seemed unable to comprehend. "Sophia, can I ask you a question? Would you think I was a terrible mother if I went on a trip alone?" "Alone? Mom, you deserve to travel. Actually, I always thought it was sad that you never left Spain. Remember when I was little and you showed me pictures of beautiful places and said you wanted to visit them one day?" Once again, it was her children who remembered the dreams she had buried. "Where are you thinking of going?" "Greece, with a friend from college." "That's amazing." "You have to go, Mom. Promise you'll go?" The promise stuck in her throat. How could she promise something she didn't even know she had the courage to keep? Sunday arrived with an oppressive weight. Carlos suggested they go to Mass together, something they hadn't done in months. At church, surrounded by other seemingly happy families, Selena wondered how many women there felt as trapped as she did. During the sermon on devotion and sacrifice, she observed the faces around her. Was there genuine peace there or just disguised resignation? Was there real happiness or just the absence of imaginable alternatives? "What are you thinking about?" Carlos whispered during a silent prayer. "Nothing important," she lied. But she was thinking about everything. The young woman she had been, the woman she could have become, the life she could still have if she found enough courage. That afternoon, while Carlos watched soccer on television, she finally packed a small suitcase. Each item was loaded with meaning: her new dress, comfortable sandals for walking, the sunscreen she would wear under the Greek sun, a hat she had secretly bought on Friday. At the bottom of his suitcase, he placed his old diary from his youth. Perhaps it was time to start writing again, to record this new phase of his life. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Donna Carmen, arriving for the traditional Sunday dinner with her characteristic military punctuality. "Selena, dear." her mother-in-law said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look different." "It's the new hair," Selena replied, forcing cordiality. I hope you're not having a midlife crisis. These things can be very destructive to a family." During dinner, Donna Carmen monopolized the conversation with stories about friends who had lost their minds in midlife, women who divorced, who went back to school, who started their own businesses. All were presented as examples of failure and self-destruction. Happiness lies in accepting what God has given us, her mother-in-law philosophized, looking directly at Selena. When a woman stops being grateful for what she has and starts dreaming about what she can't have, she finds only sadness. What if what God gave us included the courage to reach for more? Selena countered, surprising everyone at the table, including herself. The silence that followed was so thick it could practically be cut. Carlos cleared his throat uncomfortably, and Donna Carmen narrowed her eyes. "What else, dear? You have a husband who loves you. Wonderful children, a beautiful house. What more could a woman your age want? Maybe find out who she is beyond wife and mother." "Ah." The mother-in-law nodded with an expression of mock understanding. "It's empty nest syndrome, very common. It goes away with time." "What if it's not just a syndrome? What if it's an awakening?" The word awakening seemed too alarming for the familiar environment. Carlos quickly intervened, changing the subject to something safer. But Selena noticed how his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his wine glass. After the in-laws left, Carlos finally confronted Selena directly. "What's going on with you, Selena? Really? Don't give me vague answers about figuring yourself out or awakening. We've been married for 20 years. You can be honest with me." Selena looked at the man she had loved, who still loved in a complicated and confusing way. She saw in him the young man in love who had declared his love under the stars of Seville, but she also saw the man who had gradually taken control of her life without even realizing it. "Carlos, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted? Not what I thought about your decisions, but what I really wanted. I always consider your opinion. Do you consider, or just check if I agree with what you've already decided?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The question had caught him off guard. "Do you remember my dreams, Carlos? What I wanted to do before we got married?" "Selena, we were young. We all have unrealizable dreams when we're young. Impractical, or just inconvenient." The conversation was getting dangerously close to the truth they had both avoided for years. Carlos stood up abruptly. "I'm tired. Let's go to sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow." But Selena knew that tomorrow she would feel different, not necessarily better. Because tomorrow, if she had the courage, she would be on a plane heading to a life she had forgotten she wanted. That night, lying in the darkness, she heard Carlos breathing beside her and wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, or finally correct it. The bag hidden in the back of the closet seemed to pulse like a heart, reminding her that some decisions, once made, change everything forever. Monday morning dawned with a gray sky that seemed to reflect the swirling emotions in Selena's heart. She woke before her alarm, her stomach churning with a mixture of terror and excitement that made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Carlos followed his morning routine with his usual precision. Shower at 6:15, coffee at 6:45, off to work at 7:30. Selena prepared her coffee with trembling hands, each mechanical movement a stark contrast to the silent revolution taking place inside her. "Are you okay?" Carlos asked, noticing his paleness. "You look like you didn't sleep well." "I'm fine," she lied, serving him the scrambled eggs he'd eaten every morning for 15 years. "Maybe you should go to the doctor. These last few days. You don't seem like yourself." The irony of the remark almost made her laugh. For the first time in years, she was starting to look like herself. It was everything else that seemed strange now. "I'll think about it," she said, kissing him lightly on the forehead as she did every day. Carlos left for work at 7:30 sharp, as always. But this time, instead of waving from the kitchen window, Selena stood in the doorway, watching him leave with a different intensity. Was she seeing him for the last time as the woman she had been? When he returned home that night, would she still be there? At 8 o'clock, he called Lucia. "Are you still decided?" her friend asked bluntly. "I'm terrified," Selena confessed. "Great. Fear means you're doing something important. What if I'm making a terrible mistake? What if you are?" Selena, you've spent 20 years making the mistake of not living. Maybe it's time to make the opposite mistake. Lucia's perspective had a brutal logic that cut through all excuses and rationalizations. Selena looked around the spotless kitchen, with every object in its designated place, every routine perfectly established. It was an organized, predictable, safe life, and it was slowly killing his soul. "The flight leaves at 2?" he asked, his voice sounding firmer than he felt. "At 2 sharp. We'll meet at the airport at 12. I'll be there." After hanging up the phone, Selena stood motionless for several minutes, as if poised on the threshold between two worlds. On one side, the familiar life, with all its limitations, but also its familiar security. On the other, the unknown, terrifying and seductive in equal measure. At 9 o'clock, he began writing a letter to Carlos. He tore up 3 drafts before arriving at one that expressed, however imperfectly, what he needed to say. "Carlos, by the time you read this, I'll be on a plane to Greece. I know this must sound crazy, and maybe it is, but I need to take this trip, not just to see other places, but to get to know myself again. It's not about you being a bad husband. You're a good man, Carlos. But somewhere along the 20 years, I forgot who I was before I became your wife. I need to find that person again, even if it's just for a few days. I can no longer live as if my life were already over at 44. I need to find out if there's still time to dream, to discover, to be surprised. I'll be back in a week. I hope that when I do, we can talk honestly about who we are and who we want to be from now on. With love and courage, Selena." He left the letter on the kitchen table, next to the cup of coffee that Carlos would find when he returned for lunch. At 10 o'clock, she grabbed her small suitcase and left the house. On the doorstep, she paused for a moment, looking back. The house suddenly seemed smaller, as if she were seeing it from a distance much greater than the few steps she had taken. "See you soon," he whispered to the walls that had been his confidants for so long. This time, he didn't wait for an answer. The taxi ride to the airport was a journey through familiar landscapes that suddenly seemed charged with meaning. Every street, every building, every corner told the story of a life lived within carefully established boundaries. But today, she was crossing those boundaries. At the Madrid airport, she spotted Lucia before her friend even saw her. At 51, Lucia radiated an energy Selena envied. Silver hair cut in a modern style, comfortable yet elegant clothes, and a posture that suggested someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "Selena." Lucia ran to her and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You really came. I was afraid you'd lose your nerve at the last minute." "I almost lost," Selena admitted. "Actually, I'm still losing. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear." As they waited to board, Selena felt her phone vibrate. A message from Carlos. "I got home for lunch and you weren't there. Is everything okay?" She stared at the screen for a long moment, then silenced the phone without responding. There would be time for explanations later. Now, it was time for discovery. "Last call for passengers bound for Athens," announced the metallic voice from the loudspeaker. Selena looked at Lucia, then at the boarding gate, then at her silent phone. For a moment, the weight of all the expectations, responsibilities, and fears seemed unbearable. "Shall we go?" Lucia asked, extending her hand. Selena took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs in a way that felt fuller than she had in years. She took her friend's hand and walked toward the gate. "Let's go," she said, and each step took her further from the woman she had been and closer to the woman she could become. As the plane took off, Selena pressed her face against the window and watched Madrid shrink below her until it became nothing but distant lights. There was no turning back now. For the first time in 2 decades, she was truly alone with her choices. And instead of terror, he felt something he had forgotten existed, the intoxicating sensation of freedom. The first impact of Greece hit Selena with the force of a divine revelation. The dry heat of the Mediterranean air contrasted sharply with the familiar humidity of Seville, and the light, my God, the light, seemed golden and liquid, transforming everything it touched into something magical. "Welcome back to the world of the living," Lucia said, watching the look of astonishment on her friend's face as they walked through the Athens airport. Selena smiled, a strange and wonderful feeling spreading through her chest. When was the last time she had smiled without thinking about it? The ferry ride from Athens to Santorini was a sensory experience that challenged everything Selena thought she knew about travel. The Aegean Sea stretched into infinity in shades of blue she hadn't known existed, while the salty wind tousled her freshly cut hair in a way that, strangely, made her feel more like herself than she had in years. "Look," Lucia said, pointing to a pod of dolphins accompanying the ferry. "They welcome us." Selena laughed, a genuine, spontaneous laugh that surprised her. When had she last laughed like that? Not the polite laugh of family dinners or the forced laughter of social conversation, but a laugh that came straight from her soul. Her first sight of Santorini nearly brought her to tears. The white houses and blue domes seemed sculpted by the gods themselves, creating a landscape that defied logic and embraced pure beauty. It was exactly as she had imagined in her youthful dreams, only more real, more vivid, more transformative than any fantasy. "It's real," she whispered to herself, involuntarily touching her heart. "What is real?" asked Lucia. "All of this. I was afraid it was just a fantasy, that reality might not be as beautiful as I imagined." "Ah, dear friend," Lucia said softly, "you are about to discover that reality can be much more beautiful than you dared to imagine." The small hotel Lucia had chosen was in Oia, the village famous for its sunsets. Selena's room had a small but perfectly positioned balcony overlooking the sea and the volcanic caldera. She stood there for long minutes, simply breathing and absorbing the magnitude of the moment. For the first time in 20 years, she was completely alone in a place where no one knew her. No one expected her to cook dinner, shop, or fulfill any role other than simply being herself. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Her phone had vibrated incessantly during the trip, but she had resisted the temptation to check her messages. Now, in the solitude of her Greek room, she finally looked. 17 messages from Carlos. The emotional progression was clear. Confusion, concern, irritation, and finally, a cold anger she recognized well. "Selena, this is ridiculous. Come home immediately. I'm canceling your credit cards. You need to stop this madness. My mother is hysterical. How could you do this to us?" A part of her, the part conditioned by years of seeking approval, felt the familiar wave of guilt. But another part, a part that was growing with every hour she spent away from home, felt something different. Indignation. With us? As if their need for self-discovery were a personal attack on them. He decided not to answer yet. First, he needed to figure out who he was in this new reality before trying to explain his actions to anyone else. Lucia knocked on the door. "Ready for your first Greek adventure?" They walked through the narrow streets of Oia, and Selena found herself absorbing every detail with an intensity that surprised her. The bougainvillea flowers cascading from the balconies, the aroma of grilled lamb mingling with the salty scent of the sea, the musical sound of the Greek language spoken by the locals. They stopped at a small tavern with tables spread out on a terrace overlooking the sea. The owner, a man in his 60s with a thick mustache and kind eyes, welcomed them as if they were dear friends he hadn't seen in a long time. "Kalispera, beautiful ladies. Welcome to paradise." "Kalispera, Giannis," Lucia replied, clearly already familiar with the man. "This is my friend Selena, the one I told you about." Giannis studied Selena with the experienced eye of someone who'd seen many tourists over the years. "Ah, you're the one rediscovering life, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. I haven't smiled properly in a long time." The observation, made with such kindness and intuition, touched Selena deeply. A stranger had seen in just a few minutes something that those closest to her seemed to have forgotten to look for. "How do you know?" she asked. "Oh, my dear, I've lived here for 60 years. I've seen so many people come lost and leave found. Santorini has that magic." "But," he leaned in conspiratorially, "the magic only works if you let it." During dinner, fresh fish grilled with herbs she'd never tasted before, olive oil that tasted like liquid sunshine, wine that seemed to capture the essence of the Mediterranean. Selena felt something shift inside her. Every flavor was more intense, every conversation more meaningful, every moment more present than she'd experienced in years. "You look different," Lucia observed, pouring more wine. "Different how?" "More here, present, as if you had woken up after a long sleep." Selina considered the words. That was exactly how he felt, as if he'd woken from a long, hazy dream to discover that real life was much more vibrant than he remembered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold that defied description, Selina found herself crying. Not from sadness, but from an emotion so intense I couldn't name it. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "You're beautiful," said a male voice behind her. Selina turned, surprised to find a Mediterranean-looking man watching her with a warm smile. He appeared to be in his 50s, with dark hair flecked with silver, deep brown eyes, and a presence that radiated quiet confidence. "Sorry," he said in English with a charming Greek accent. "I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just that you seem so moved by the sunset. It's rare to see someone appreciate beauty so intensely." Lucia gently kicked Selina under the table, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. "Oh, this is my first time here," Selina stammered, suddenly feeling self-aware in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "First time in Santorini, or first time allowing yourself to see the beauty?" the man asked with a perspicacity that left her speechless. Lucia stood up diplomatically. "I'll get more wine," she announced, leaving Selina alone with the stranger. "May I?" he asked, indicating the empty chair. Selina nodded, her heart pounding in a way she'd forgotten was possible. When was the last time an attractive man had shown interest in her company? When was the last time she'd allowed herself to notice such interest? "I'm Petros," he said, extending his hand. "Petros Andreadis." "Selina," she replied, feeling his warm hand wrap around hers. "Selina Castañeda." "Castañeda? Spanish?" "From Seville." "Ah, one of the most romantic cities in the world. And what brings a woman from Seville to our little Greek island?" The simple question opened a door Selina hadn't known she was ready to walk through. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the magical sunset, or maybe it was simply the first time in years someone had shown genuine interest in her personal story. But she found herself telling Petros things she'd barely admitted to herself. She spoke about the feeling of living someone else's life, about forgotten dreams, about waking up one day and realizing she had become invisible to herself. Petros listened with an attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way she had forgotten was possible. "And your husband?" he asked gently. "Didn't he want to come with you on this journey of rediscovery?" Selina instinctively touched her wedding ring, which suddenly seemed to weigh more than it should. "My husband, Carlos, is a good man," she said carefully, "but he sees this trip as a phase, a temporary crisis that will pass if I behave and get back to my routine. And you? What do you see?" "I see a chance to remember who I was before I became just an extension of other people." Petros nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "You know, I went through something similar a few years ago. After my wife died, I thought my life was over too. I was 52 years old and I felt like I was just a ghost wandering the places I used to live. How did you get out of that? One day at a time, and remembering that it's not betrayal to honor the dead by living fully." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And maybe it's not betrayal to honor a marriage by living fully either." The words resonated with Selina, with a force that left her breathless. It was exactly what she had tried to explain to Carlos but had been unable to articulate. "Are you a psychologist?" she asked, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment with humor. Petros laughed, a rich, warm sound that made her smile involuntarily. "An archaeologist, actually, specializing in ancient cultures. There's something about studying civilizations that died millennia ago that teaches us the importance of living while we're here." When Lucia returned with the wine, she found Selina and Petros engaged in animated conversation about art, history, and philosophy. The transformation in her friend was evident. Her eyes sparkled, her hands gesticulated expressively, and there was an energy about her that Lucia hadn't seen since her university days. "It looks like you two are having a fascinating conversation," Lucia observed. "Petros was telling me about the archaeological digs here on the island," Selina said, her voice thick with an excitement that surprised even her. "Would you like to see some of them tomorrow?" Petros offered. "I can show you places most tourists never see. Places where you can really feel the history beneath your feet." Selina looked at Lucia, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love to," she said, and realized she was being completely honest. When was the last time she'd said, "I'd love to," and really meant it? That night, back in her room, Selena stood on the balcony looking up at the stars, which seemed brighter than she'd ever seen them. Her phone had stopped vibrating. Carlos had finally given up on bombarding her with messages, at least temporarily. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't know exactly what would happen tomorrow. And for the first time in 20 years, that excited her instead of terrified her. Maybe Giannis was right about the magic of Santorini. Or maybe the magic was simply in allowing yourself to live again. Selena woke before dawn, not out of obligation or habit, but because her body seemed to have rediscovered its natural rhythm of pleasurable anticipation. For the first time in years, she was eager for what the day would bring. From the balcony of his room, he watched the sun rise over the Aegean Sea, painting the world in shades of gold and coral that no photograph could capture. He took a deep breath, feeling the salty air fill his lungs, and realized a surprising truth. He was happy. Not the artificial happiness of obligatory moments, but a genuine joy that radiated from her center and spread to her fingertips. Petros had arranged to meet them at 9 for the archaeological excursion. Selena chose her clothes with a care she hadn't shown in years. Not to impress, but because she wanted to feel comfortable in her own skin. The turquoise dress she'd impulsively bought in Seville seemed perfect for the occasion. "You look radiant," Lucia commented over breakfast. "You look 10 years younger." "I feel 10 years younger. Or maybe I feel 24 again." "And how did you feel at 24? Selena considered the question. As if the world were too big to explore in a lifetime. As if each day could bring wonderful discoveries. As if I were enough. Just me, not me, as an extension of other people. Petros arrived promptly at 9, driving an open-air Jeep that looked like it had seen decades of adventure. His smile when he saw Selena made something peculiar happen in her stomach, a feeling she'd forgotten existed. Calimera, beautiful ladies, ready to discover the secrets of Santorini. The first stop was a smaller excavation site, away from the tourist crowds. Petros explained the history with a passion that brought the ancient stones back to life. Selena found herself captivated not only by the story, but by the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his work. "Look at this," he said, guiding her to a section of the excavation where the ruins of an ancient house had been partially restored. This was the kitchen of a family that lived here 3,000 years ago. Imagine, a woman like you would sit here, preparing food for her family, perhaps dreaming of faraway places. How do you know she dreamed of faraway places? We found shells from beaches that were days away. She collected them, keeping them in small ceramic containers. Why would anyone keep distant shells if they didn't dream of traveling? The image of the ancient woman collecting shells from places she might never have visited touched Selena deeply. For how many centuries had women dreamed beyond the confines of their everyday lives? Maybe she finally got to travel, Selena said hopefully. Perhaps, Petros agreed, his eyes meeting hers. And perhaps some of us will finally find the courage to realize our dreams of distant seashells. As we walked through the ruins, Petros told stories about the people who had lived there, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. He had a knack for making the past seem immediate and relevant. "You must be a wonderful teacher," Selena commented. "It was. I taught at the university for 20 years. But after Elena died, I realized I wanted to spend my days doing what I love, not explaining what I love to people who don't always want to listen. Don't you miss academic stability? I miss financial security sometimes," he admitted honestly. "But I don't miss living a life that doesn't fully represent me." The words echoed in Selena's mind all morning. A life that doesn't fully represent me. It was exactly what she had been living. During lunch in a tavern even more secluded than the previous night, Petros showed genuine interest in her story. He asked questions about Seville, her youth, her children, but also about her dreams, her passions, her fears. "You mentioned yesterday that you've always wanted to write," he said. "About what?" "About women," she replied without hesitation. "Women who find the courage to change their lives. Women who lose themselves and find themselves again. Have you started yet?" "I've had ideas, fragments of stories in my head for years, but I always thought it was, frivolous, that I didn't have the time, or the talent, or the right." "Right? Who decides who has the right to tell stories? The simple question opened a wound Selena hadn't even known existed. Why had she spent so long waiting for permission to live her own life? "You're right," she said softly. "I guess I've been waiting for someone to give me permission to be who I really am. What if I told you the only permission you need is your own?" That afternoon, Petros took them to his favorite beach, a small cove accessible only by a steep trail. Lucia, wise as ever, decided to take a nap in the shade, leaving Selena and Petros alone by the sea. They walked along the sand, talking about art, literature, and philosophy. Selena was surprised by the ease of the conversation, by how freely her ideas flowed, unfiltered by decades of self-censorship. "May I make an observation?" Petros said, stopping to look at her. "Of course. Yesterday, when you talked about your life at home, it felt like you were describing someone else's life. Today, when you talk about your passions, your dreams, you seem completely present. It's like you're two different people." "Maybe they are," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe I've been splitting myself for so long that I've forgotten how to be a whole person. And now?" Selena looked out at the endless sea, feeling the warm breeze on her face, the sun warming her skin. "Now, I feel whole again. I don't know if I'll be able to keep this feeling when I get home, but at least I know it's there." "Selena," Petros said softly, "can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded. "Are you happy in your marriage?" The question she had avoided answering for so long was finally asked by someone else. And strangely, the answer came with surprising clarity. "I used to think so. I thought contentment was the same as happiness. But now I know there's a difference between being satisfied and being truly alive." "And you want to be alive?" "Yes," she said, the word coming out like a liberating sigh. "Yes, I do." They were silent for a moment, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. Then, as naturally as breathing, Petros took her hand. "Thank you," she said. "Why?" "For seeing me, for making me feel that I'm interesting, that my ideas matter, that my happiness is valid." "Selena," he said, turning to face her fully, "you are an extraordinary woman. Anyone who doesn't see that is blind." The kiss happened like a sunrise, inevitable, natural, transformative. It was gentle and respectful, but charged with a passion that awakened parts of Selena that had long slumbered. When they parted, she was crying. "Sorry," Petros said, alarmed. "I shouldn't have—" "No," she interrupted him, touching his face. "Don't apologize. I'm crying because I forgot I could feel this way. I forgot I could be wanted, admired, seen." That night, alone in her room, Selena finally checked Carlos's messages. Dozens of them, progressing from anger to bargaining, from threats to pleas. "Selena, please come home, we can work this out. The children are worried. How can you do this to us? If you come back now, we'll pretend none of this happened." The last message made her laugh bitterly, pretending none of this had happened, as if her soul's awakening were just a temporary lapse in judgment. For the first time, he replied, "Carlos, I can't pretend it didn't happen because it's finally happening. For the first time in years, I'm remembering who I am. I need this time. I love you, but I need to figure out if I still know how to love myself." After sending the message, she felt simultaneously guilty and liberated. She was hurting people she loved, but she was saving herself. And for the first time in 20 years, that seemed like a fair trade. The next 2 days unfolded like a vivid dream from which Selena dreaded waking. In the mornings, she explored the island with Petros and Lucia, or more often, just Petros, as Lucia had developed a remarkable talent for remembering urgent commitments whenever the three of them were together. Afternoons were spent in long conversations by the sea, while Petros worked on his archaeological notes, and Selena, for the first time in decades, attempted to write. Not obligatory letters or to-do lists, but stories. Fragments of an imaginary life where women made courageous decisions and lived the consequences with grace. "Can I read it?" Petros asked on the 4th afternoon, indicating the notebook where she was scribbling furiously. "It's nothing special," she said, but there was pride in her voice. "Just thoughts." He read silently, and Selena watched his face for signs of boredom or condescension. Instead, she saw genuine concentration, genuine interest. "This is about you," he said finally, not as a question but as an acknowledgement. "About a version of me, a version I wish I could be." "Selena," he said softly, "you already are that version. I just needed permission to see you." That night they dined alone in a hidden tavern Petros knew, far from the tourists and expectations. The conversation flowed like wine, touching on deep and intimate topics with an ease that surprised her. "Tell me about Elena," she said, finally daring to ask the question that had been puzzling her for days. Petros's face softened with a mixture of love and melancholy. Elena was pure strength, an archaeologist like me, but specializing in ancient pottery. She could look at a 3,000-year-old pot fragment and tell the entire story of the family that owned it. "Did you meet at work?" "On a dig in Crete. She was arguing with the dig leader about the dating of some finds, and I was fascinated by her passion, by the way she refused to accept lazy conclusions." He smiled at the memory. "It took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her to dinner." "How did she die?" "Cancer. 2 years of fighting, 2 years of alternating hope and despair. She died 4 years ago, but I only started living again in the last 2. "What made you start?" Petros considered the question carefully. "One day, I was sorting through her things, and I found a diary where she had written about how she wanted me to live after she was gone. She said the only way to honor her love was to continue loving. Life, work, other people. She said if I became a shadow of myself, it would be like killing her twice over." Selena felt tears well up in her eyes. "She seems like an extraordinary woman." "It was. And do you know what else she wrote?" Petros leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "She wrote that she hoped I would find someone who would remind me of who I was when I was in love with life." The air between them was charged with meaning. Selena felt her heart race, a sensation she had forgotten existed. "Petros, Selena, I know you're married. I know your life is complicated. But I also know that these days when I'm with you, I remember who I was when Elena was alive. I remember what it's like to be genuinely interested in another person, what it's like to want to know their every thought, their every dream. I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know what to do with this feeling. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to make any decisions today or tomorrow or even next week. Just allow yourself to feel. How long have you denied yourself the right to feel?" The question echoed deeply. For how long? When was the last time he had allowed himself to feel attraction, passion, the pure pleasure of emotional discovery? "A long time," she whispered. "So just feel, for now. Whatever that means, wherever it leads, just allow yourself the experience of being alive to those emotions." They walked back to the hotel in comfortable silence, hands clasped, each lost in thought. At Selena's door, Petros kissed her again, more deeply this time with a passion that made her tremble. "Good night, Selena," he said softly. "Thank you for reminding me what it's like to be alive." Alone in her room, Selena looked in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks were flushed, and there was an energy about her that seemed to radiate from within. He picked up the phone and impulsively called Sophia. "Mommy, how is Greece?" "It's revealing," Selena said, choosing her word carefully. "You look different. Your voice is different." "Different how?" "Lighter. More happy." "How long has it been since I heard you truly happy?" Her daughter's observation struck her like a bolt of lightning. If even Sophia had noticed her unhappiness over the years, how had she denied it for so long? "Sophia, can I ask you a weird question?" "Of course." "Would you think I was a terrible mother if I told you I've rediscovered who I am and that maybe that means changes in my life?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mama," Sophia finally said, "I would think you were terrible if you didn't make changes. Miguel and I always knew you sacrificed parts of yourself for us, for Papa, for your family. We always hoped that one day you would give yourself the chance to be truly happy. And your father? Daddy's gonna have to learn to love the real woman, not just the convenient version of you." Sophia's words echoed in her mind all night. The convenient version of you. That was exactly what she had become. An edited version of herself, cut and molded to fit the spaces others had created for her. But here, On this Greek island, with a man who saw her completely and wanted her exactly as she was discovering that the real her was far more interesting than she had imagined. For the first time in 20 years, she was eager to discover who else she could become. On the morning of her 5th day in Santorini, Selena woke with a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. It wasn't anxiety, more like a growing awareness that something fundamental was about to change, and she needed to be prepared. He found Lucia on the hotel balcony drinking coffee and looking out to sea with a thoughtful expression. "You look worried," Selena observed, sitting down next to her friend. "Not worried. Observant." Lucia turned to face her. "Selena, in 5 days you've completely transformed. You're radiant, confident, alive. But I've seen this transformation before in myself and in other women. And I know now comes the hardest part." "Which part?" "The part where you have to decide if this new version of yourself is just a vacation fantasy, or if it's who you really want to be for the rest of your life." Lucia's words touched on the heart of the dilemma Selena had avoided confronting. It was easy to be brave and authentic in Santorini, surrounded by beauty and novelty. But was it possible to maintain that integrity back in the reality of Seville? "How did you know when it was time to make real changes in your life?" Selena asked. "When I realized that the pain of staying the same had become greater than the fear of change." That morning, Petros showed up with a different proposal. Instead of exploring ruins, he wanted to show her his apartment, where he worked on his research and wrote about his discoveries. The small apartment in Fira perfectly reflected who Petros was, filled with books, artifacts, photographs of excavations, and a desk strategically positioned to capture the morning light. It was a space where someone lived intensely, where every object held personal meaning. "It's perfect," Selena said, touching an antique ceramic paperweight. "You can feel the passion in every corner. It's small compared to what most people consider necessary for a successful life," Petros said. "But it's mine. Every decision here was mine. Every object chosen because it brings me joy or inspires me." Selena found herself imagining what it would be like to live in a space that truly reflected who she was. Her home in Seville was beautiful, well decorated, but it had been created by committee. Her preferences filtered through Carlos's opinions, social expectations, and the family's practical needs. "Can I show you something?" Petros asked, opening a desk drawer. It was a manuscript, hundreds of pages of typewritten text with handwritten notes in the margins. "It's a book I'm writing about the women of ancient Greece. Not the famous ones, queens and goddesses, but the ordinary ones, the ones who left small traces of their lives in letters, in graffiti, on personal objects." Selena flipped through a few pages, fascinated by the meticulous research and the way Petros brought these forgotten women to life. "Why this topic?" "Because I realize that history is told mostly by men, about men. But women have always been there, living, dreaming, fighting, loving. Their dreams and struggles were no less important for being less documented. The connection to her own situation was impossible to ignore. How many women throughout history had felt like she did, caught between who they were and who they were expected to be?" "I'd like you to read a few chapters," Petros said. "Your perspective would be very valuable." "Do you really believe my opinion has value?" The question was out before she could censor it, revealing years of internalized insecurity. Petros stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Selena, you're intelligent, sensitive, and have an intuitive understanding of human emotions that would take most academics years to develop. Why would it be surprising that your opinion has value?" Because Carlos had never asked her opinion on his work, because she had internalized the idea that her thoughts were only suitable for domestic matters, because she had spent so long being treated like a life assistant that she had forgotten she had a mind of her own. "Thank you," she said simply, but the words carried the weight of a profound revelation. They spent the afternoon reading together, discussing the lives of the ancient women Petros had brought back to life through his research. Selena found herself making connections, offering insights, participating in an intellectual conversation that nourished her in a way she had forgotten was possible. "You have a gift for this," Petros said as night fell. "You should consider writing academically. Your observations on the psychology of these women are brilliant." I never thought I could." "Why not?" "Because Carlos always changed the subject when she tried to discuss serious ideas. because she had been conditioned to believe her intellectual capabilities were limited, because she had spent so much time being defined by others that she had forgotten how to define herself. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess I forgot I had something to contribute besides keeping a house running smoothly." "Selena," Petros said, taking her hands, "you have so much to contribute to the world. Not just to your family, but to the world. Your ideas, your perspective, your ability to understand the emotional complexities of the human experience, all of it is of immense value." That night, alone in her room, Selena looked in the mirror and asked a question she had avoided for 5 days. "What do you want?" The answer came with a clarity that surprised her. "I want to live. I want to contribute. I want to be seen, heard, valued. I want to wake up in the morning looking forward to what the day may bring. I want conversations that challenge and inspire me. I want to feel alive in my own life." She picked up her phone and found a message from Carlos that had arrived a few hours earlier. "Selena, enough. This game has gone on long enough. I'm flying to Athens tomorrow. We'll meet and sort this out like responsible adults." Selena's stomach tightened. Charles was coming. The magical bubble of self-discovery was about to be tested by the reality of the life she had left behind. For the first time since arriving in Greece, she felt real fear. Not fear of Carlos, but fear of losing the woman he had rediscovered. Fear of returning to her comfortable self. But he also felt something else. Determination. 5 days of freedom had shown him what he was missing. There was no turning back now, even if the path ahead was uncertain and frightening. The real woman had awakened and would not go back to sleep quietly. Carlos arrived in Santorini like a storm, dressed in an impeccable suit. Selena saw him stepping off the ferry the next morning, his rigid posture and determined expression a stark contrast to the island's laid-back atmosphere. Even from a distance, she could feel his irritation radiating like heat from asphalt. "He doesn't look very happy," observed Lucia, who had insisted on accompanying Selena to the port for moral support. "He hates unpredictability," Selena said, her stomach churning. "And I've become very unpredictable lately." When Carlos finally located her in the small crowd, his relief was briefly visible before being replaced by the controlled expression she knew so well. The face he wore when he was determined to regain control of a situation. "Selena," he said, approaching with measured steps. "Thank God you're okay." He hugged her, but the gesture felt more performative than genuine, a public declaration that they were a reunited couple, not an expression of real emotion. "Carlos, you didn't have to come all this way," she said gently but firmly. "Of course I did. My wife disappears without warning, leaving only a dramatic note. What else would I do?" The word disappear irritated her, as if she were property that had been lost, not a person who had made a conscious choice. "I didn't disappear. I told you exactly where I would be." "Lucia," Carlos said, finally acknowledging his friend's presence with a cool nod. "Thank you for taking care of Selena during this phase." The choice of the word phase was not accidental. Carlos was framing the entire experience as something temporary and irrational, something that could be resolved with logic and firmness. "It wasn't a phase, Carlos," Selena said. "It was an awakening. Can we discuss this in private? I've booked a room at the hotel." "What hotel?" "The same one you're staying in. I got the suite next to yours." The information hit her like an invasion. He had tracked her movements, made reservations, made unilateral decisions about how the next few days would unfold. This was Carlos being Carlos, taking control, organizing, resolving. Lucia, reading the tension in the air, gently touched Selena's arm. "I'll let you two talk. If you need me, I'll be at Giannis's tavern." They walked to the hotel in tense silence. Carlos observed everything around him with the critical eye of someone evaluating a questionable investment. The narrow streets, the white architecture, the tourists relaxing in seaside cafes. "It's nice," he said finally, as if making a concession. "I understand why you wanted to come. But a week was enough, don't you think?" "Enough for what?" "For, I don't know. For whatever it was you needed to get out of your system." They had arrived at the hotel terrace where other guests were having breakfast overlooking the sea. Carlos chose a secluded table and gestured for her to sit, automatically assuming the role of host even on neutral territory. "Carlos," Selena said, remaining standing. I didn't come here to get something out of my system. I came here to find myself. And found it? The question had a condescending tone that made her feel like a child being questioned about a game that had gone on too long. Yes, she said simply. I found it. Great. So now we can go home and get on with our lives. Our life? Or the life you planned for us? Carlos finally seemed to realize this wouldn't be as simple as he'd imagined. He studied her face more closely, noticing changes that went beyond the haircut and new clothes. Selena, what's really going on here? And don't give me vague answers about self-discovery. Talk to me directly. It was the first time in years he'd actually asked her what she was thinking, not just assumed he knew. Ironically, now that he was finally asking the right question, Selena wasn't sure he was ready for the honest answer. Okay, she said, finally sitting down. I'll come right out and say it. Carlos, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted to do this weekend? Not just agreed to your suggestions, but actually asked me what I wanted? We always discuss our plans. You present options and I choose between them. That's not the same as asking what I want. Selena, be reasonable. Someone has to make decisions. Someone has to plan, organize. Why does that someone always have to be you? The question caught him off guard. Carlos had assumed the role of decision-maker so gradually and naturally that he had never questioned whether it was what they both truly wanted. Because I'm good at it. Because it works. Who does it work for? For us. For our family. We have a good life, Selena. Stable, comfortable, respectable. Why would you want to throw it all away? I don't want to throw it away. I want it to be real. Real? What's not real about our lives? Selena looked at this man she had loved, who she still loved in a complicated way, and wondered how to explain that she had become a supporting character in his own life. Carlos, can you describe me without using my relationship with other people? Without saying that I am your wife, the mother of your children, the daughter of my parents? You are. The silence stretched as he struggled for words, and in that silence, Selena found her answer. You can't, can you? Because somewhere along the way, I stopped existing as an individual person and became just a function. The efficient wife, the devoted mother, the respectful daughter-in-law. That's not fair, Selena. No? Then tell me, what are my dreams, Carlos? What am I passionate about? What makes me excited to wake up in the morning? More silence. Tell me about my personality. Am I funny? Am I intellectual? Am I adventurous? Am I shy? You are wonderful. You are perfect for our life. The final sentence said it all. She was perfect for his life, not her own. What if I don't want to be perfect for someone else's life anymore? What if I want to find out what kind of life would be perfect for me? It was then that Carlos finally seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. His wife wasn't having a temporary breakdown. She was having a permanent revelation. Selena, he said, his voice taking on a softer, more vulnerable tone. I love you. You know I love you. I know. And I love you too. But Carlos, do you love the real woman? Or do you love the convenient version of me that fits perfectly into the life you've built? The question hung between them like a bridge that one of them would have to have the courage to cross. And for the first time in 20 years of marriage, Carlos didn't have a ready answer. The silence between them stretched for minutes that felt like hours. Carlos stared out at the sea, his face going through a series of expressions, confusion, resistance, and finally, something that felt like painful self-recognition. You're right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who you are beyond the roles you play in my life. The admission visibly pained him, but there was relief in it too, as if he were confessing something he had subconsciously realized long ago. And the scariest thing, he continued, is that I realize I don't know who I am anymore either, other than the working husband, the providing father, the man who has it all together. Selena felt an unexpected wave of compassion for the man before her. Carlos had also lost himself in social expectations and roles, just in a different way. When was the last time you did something because you wanted to, not because it was expected or necessary? She asked gently. Carlos thought for a long moment. I can't remember, he admitted. Maybe Maybe when we were young and I took you dancing just because I loved to see you smile. Do you remember who I was when we danced? I remember. Her eyes softened at the memory. You were incandescent, passionate about everything, about music, about life, about the dreams we had. You talked about wanting to write, wanting to travel, wanting to discover new things. Your eyes would shine when you dreamed aloud. What happened to that woman? I said they were impractical dreams, that we had responsibilities, that growing up meant putting dreams aside. And you believed that? Carlos hesitated, wrestling with a truth he had never faced. No, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you pursued your dreams, you'd find you didn't need me. Afraid that you were more interesting, more talented, more adventurous than I could ever be. So I subtly discouraged your dreams because they made me feel inadequate. The brutal honesty of the confession touched Selena deeply. She could see the tears welling in her husband's eyes and realized that he too had been a prisoner of his own fears and insecurities. Carlos, she said softly, have you ever considered that maybe I wanted to share these dreams with you? Not leave you behind? No, he admitted. I was so focused on protecting what we had that I forgot to think about what we could have. They fell silent, each processing 20 years of misunderstood patterns and missed opportunities. Selena, Carlos finally said, how did we get here? How did we become strangers living in the same house? One small compromise at a time, she replied. A seemingly small concession here, a surrender there, until I looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. And now? Who is the woman you see in the mirror now? Selena thought about the woman she had discovered in the last few days. The one who laughed spontaneously. The one who had strong opinions. The one who wrote stories and discussed archaeology with passion. I see someone who has things to say. Someone who wants to contribute to the world in meaningful ways. Someone who wants adventures and deep conversations and wants to feel alive in their own life. And this woman, does she still have room for me? The question was charged with genuine vulnerability. For the first time in years, Carlos wasn't assuming he was entitled to her place in his life. He was asking if he could earn it. That depends, Selena said. Of what? If you can love the real woman, not just the convenient version. If you can be a partner in a life we build together, rather than the architect of a life you design alone. Carlos nodded slowly, as if processing instructions for a completely new life. How do we do this? He asked. How do we start over after 20 years? Maybe starting with honesty, with real curiosity about each other, with space for both of you to be who you truly are. What if we discover we don't like who we really are? Then at least we'll know the truth, and we'll be able to make choices based on reality, not fantasies about who we think we should be. At that moment, Petros appeared at the entrance to the terrace. He stopped abruptly when he saw Carlos, clearly not wanting to intrude. Selena waved him closer, knowing this confrontation was also inevitable. Carlos, she said, this is Petros Andreadis. Petros, this is my husband, Carlos. The two men studied each other with the caution of potential rivals, but also with an unexpected curiosity. Petros is an archaeologist, Selena continued. He showed me some incredible historical sites on the island. Among other things, Carlos said, a slight edge to his voice. Petros, to his credit, didn't back down from the implied accusation. Your wife is an extraordinary woman, he said calmly. Intelligent, thoughtful, passionate about learning. You are a fortunate man. Yes, Carlos said, studying Petros more carefully. Yes, I am. She also mentioned that you're a good man, that you've built a life together and raised wonderful children. That's no small accomplishment. The unexpected generosity in Petros's statement seemed to disarm Carlos. He had clearly expected confrontation, not recognition. Thank you, Carlos said calmly. Petros turned to Selena. I came to say goodbye. I'm leaving for Crete tomorrow for a new dig. But I wanted you to know that these past few days have been special. You've reminded me what it means to be truly alive to new experiences. He kissed her hand gently, a gesture that managed to be both intimate and respectful. Whatever you decide about your life, remember that you have much to offer the world. Don't hide your light. After Petros left, Carlos was silent for a long time. He's in love with you, he said finally. Maybe, Selena admitted. And maybe I'm a little in love with the version of myself he sees. What about me? Are you still in love with me? Selena looked at this man who had shared her life for 2 decades. She saw the young man who had fallen in love with her, but she also saw the man who had gradually diminished them both through fear and control. I'm in love with who you can be, she said honestly. With who you were when we were young and dreamed together. The question is, can you be that person again? Can we both be those people again? Carlos reached across the table and took her hand. I'd like to try, he said. I'd like to learn who you really are, and maybe learn who I really am too. For the first time since he'd arrived, Selena smiled at him. Not the polite smile of marital obligation, but the genuine smile of someone seeing possibility where they'd previously seen only limitation. So let's start with a real conversation, she said. Tell me about your dreams, Carlos. Not your plans or responsibilities, but your dreams. And there, on a terrace overlooking the Aegean Sea, with 2 decades of patterns to undo and a lifetime of possibilities ahead, they began the difficult and beautiful work of knowing each other for the first time. 6 months later, Selena woke up in her own bed in Seville, but the room felt different. Not just because she had redesigned the space to reflect her own tastes, more vibrant colors, art on the walls, a desk positioned near the window where the morning light was perfect for writing, but because she herself was different. The November sun filtered through the new curtains as she got up, not to make Carlos's coffee, but to make her own, at her own pace, in her own time. Carlos had already left for work, not because she had made him breakfast, but because he had learned to make his own. The change had been difficult for him initially, but now he expressed genuine pride in his new domestic independence. Good morning, home, she said, but this time not to the empty walls. Sophia had come to spend the weekend and was still sleeping in the guest room, and Miguel would arrive that afternoon for Sunday lunch, a tradition they had reinvented as a collaborative event where everyone contributed to the preparation. In the kitchen, Selena opened her laptop and checked her emails. 3 messages from publishers interested in the short stories she had submitted, 2 invitations to lectures on women and personal reinvention in other cities, and a message from Petros sharing photos of his new dig in Crete. The correspondence with Petros had continued, a rich epistolary friendship that nourished the intellectual part of her soul. He had become an occasional contributor to her writings, offering historical perspectives on women's experiences. Carlos had initially felt threatened by the correspondence, but gradually came to see Petros as a catalyst who had helped his wife become more interesting, not as a threat to their marriage. Mommy? Sophia appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, but with alert eyes. Are you writing again? Always, Selena replied with a smile. I'm working on an essay about women who made significant changes in their lives after 40. Based on personal experience? Partially. Selena closed her laptop and focused on her daughter. How did you sleep? And how are your studies going? Over breakfast, mother and daughter talked about everything. Medicine, literature, relationships, dreams. Sophia had commented several times in recent months how her mother had become a more interesting person to talk to. Someone with her own opinions and genuine curiosity about the world. Can I ask you a personal question? Sophia said, finishing her toast. Always. You and Dad. Are you guys really okay? Some of my friends, when their parents go through big changes like yours, they end up getting divorced. Selena considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had been challenging. She and Carlos had had to renegotiate virtually every aspect of their relationship. There had been conflict, confusion, and moments when they both wondered if it would be easier to simply go their separate ways. But there were also insights. Carlos had proven surprisingly adaptable when he wasn't defensive. He had begun individual therapy to work through the control issues he'd developed. And most importantly, he genuinely seemed to enjoy getting to know a more complete version of his wife. We're learning to be married to who we really are, rather than who we think we should be, she said finally. It's hard work, but it's honest work. And are you happy? I'm alive, Selena replied, which is different from happy, but also includes happiness. I feel like I'm finally living my own life instead of being a supporting character in someone else's. Around noon, Carlos returned home with flowers. Not because it was a special occasion, but because he'd passed a florist and remembered how she'd mentioned loving pink peonies. Small gestures of attention had become part of their new dynamic. "How's the book?" he asked, kissing her cheek. "Progressing. And how was your morning?" "Good. I actually had an interesting conversation with Roberto about possibly reducing my office hours." This was a new development. Carlos had begun to question not only his standards at home, but also his relationship with work. The idea of creating more time for personal interests was something he had never considered before. Miguel arrived in time for lunch, bringing his new girlfriend, Carmen, a young woman studying architecture who impressed everyone with her passion for sustainable design. Watching Miguel interact with someone who challenged him intellectually reminded Selena of how she and Carlos had been in their early years, excited to learn from each other, eager to share ideas. Over lunch, the family discussed everything from politics to literature to travel plans. Carlos had surprised everyone by suggesting they take a family trip to Greece the following year, not to recreate Selena's journey, but to create new memories together as a family that had evolved. "I'd like to meet this Petros," he had said. "Anyone who could see in you what I had forgotten to look for deserves my gratitude." The statement had been a moment of revelation, demonstrating Carlos's growing confidence in his renewed relationship. Later that evening, after the kids had left, Selena and Carlos sat on their terrace with glasses of wine, watching a sunset that reminded her of those magical nights in Santorini. "Do you miss it?" Carlos asked. "The freedom of being completely alone?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I've learned that I can be free within a relationship too, if both people are committed to growth rather than control." "And you don't regret choosing to work for us instead of other options?" He was asking about Petros without saying his name. It had taken Carlos months to be able to reference this part of Selena's journey without defensiveness. "Carlos, I learned something important in Greece. It wasn't about finding a different life. It was about finding the courage to demand more from the life I already had." "And did you get what you demanded?" Selena looked at her husband, really looked at him. She saw a man who had been willing to examine his own assumptions, to change patterns that had formed over decades, to love her more completely by loving her more honestly. "I'm getting there," she said. "Every day, a little more." That night, as they prepared for bed, Selena caught sight of herself in the mirror. A woman stared back who was recognizably herself, yet vibrant and alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Her eyes held confidence. Her posture suggested someone comfortable in her own skin. "Thank you," she said calmly. "Why?" asked Carlos, listening. "For being willing to meet me where I am now, rather than insisting I go back to where I was." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me that it's never too late to become who we were meant to be." When Selena turned out the light and settled into bed next to a man who had learned to love all of her, not just the convenient parts, she felt a deep satisfaction. Not the contentment of resignation, but the joy of someone living authentically. Tomorrow would bring new writing projects, new conversations, new discoveries about herself and life. There would be challenges, certainly, but they would be faced by a woman who knew her own worth, her own voice, her own desires. A woman who had found the courage to be completely herself, and in doing so had created space for everyone around her to be completely themselves too. Outside, a Mediterranean wind carried scents of olive blossoms and distant sea, reminding her of an island where she had remembered how to live. But she no longer needed to be anywhere else to feel alive. She was home, in every sense of the word, home in her marriage, home in her life, and most importantly, home with herself.